The grand ballroom of the Hotel Maison Royal had hosted debutante balls, political fundraisers, and at least 2 weddings that ended before the reception was over. But in 22 years of operation, the staff had never seen anything like this. 214 guests sat in complete silence. Crystal chandeliers threw gold light across a room that smelled of white roses and expensive restraint. At the front, 7 women stood near the elevated stage in a careful line. Each one dressed in white, each one breathing in a very controlled way that suggested she had been told, very clearly, that this moment was being watched. They were stunning, all 7 of them. Educated, accomplished. Polished to a shine that would have impressed anyone in that room. Anyone except the man they were waiting for. Kangdi sat at the head table like a man who had attended his own funeral once and found it only mildly interesting. He was 30 years old, still, and precise in the way that suggested he had never once moved without intention. Dark suit. No tie. A single cufflink catch of light when he reached for his water glass and then set it down without drinking. Everyone in the room was watching him. The 7 women were watching him. His advisors, positioned along the left wall like expensive furniture, were watching him. Kangdi was watching none of them. Slowly, he rose from his chair. The room didn't exhale so much as collectively forget how to breathe. This was it. This was the moment. 3 months of a carefully engineered selection process, 7 candidates, and tonight, finally, Kangdi would choose his bride. The first woman in line straightened her shoulders. The second smiled with just the right amount of warmth. Kangdi walked toward the stage, and then walked past it, past the first woman, past the second, past all 7 without a single glance. While a sound like a wave pulling back from shore moved through the room, 200 people inhaling at once. His eyes were fixed on something behind them. Someone, standing near the back wall, half hidden behind a decorative pillar. Holding a clipboard she no longer needed, wearing a navy dress that was professional rather than ceremonial, because she had never been meant to be part of this evening's selection. Tiana Johnson felt the moment Kangdi's gaze landed on her the way. You feel a door open in a room you thought was sealed. "No," she whispered, to no one, to herself, to every sensible thought she'd had in the last 3 months. He didn't stop walking until he was standing directly in front of her. The clipboard slipped in her hands. She tightened her grip on it like it was the only solid thing left in the room, which, at that particular second, it was. Kangdi reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. The diamond caught the chandelier light before the ring was fully visible, and the gasp that moved through the ballroom was the kind that 200 people would describe differently the next morning, but all remember for the rest of their lives. Tiana stared at the ring, then at him, then at the ring again. "You hired me," she said, and her voice came out steadier than she felt, which was remarkable given that her hands were shaking, "to find your bride." For the first time all evening. Something shifted in Kangdi's expression, not quite a smile, but close enough that it terrified her. "I hired you," he said quietly, "because I already knew who she was." The room exploded. Behind him, one of the 7 women in white made a sound that she would later claim was a cough. Tiana felt the world tilt very slightly on its axis. The way it does when you realize the story you thought you were in is not the story that's actually been happening. And if you want to understand what that moment actually meant, if you want to understand how a matchmaker ended up standing in a ballroom with a diamond ring being held out to her by the most feared man in New Orleans, then you have to go back 3 months. To the morning it all started. To the contract she almost didn't take. And to the offer sitting in her purse that, if she'd accepted, would have meant she was somewhere else entirely that night. Welcome to Afro Korean Drama. Everything you're about to hear is an original story, written and produced for this channel. Tonight's story is about what happens when the person hired to find love becomes the person who changes what love means. Before we go back to the beginning, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. It genuinely helps more than you know. Now let's go back to where this really started. 3 months earlier, Tiana Johnson was standing in her kitchen at 6:47 in the morning, arguing with her coffee maker. not verbally. She had a professional reputation to maintain, but internally, with significant conviction. The machine had been making a sound like a small, very tired animal for 2 weeks, and Tiana had fixed it twice with a combination of patience, YouTube tutorials, and the kind of stubborn optimism that had also gotten her through a failed engagement, a near bankruptcy, and the year she tried to make her matchmaking agency work out of a studio apartment with a folding table as a desk. That was 4 years ago. Now the agency had an office on Magazine Street with 3 full-time staff and a waiting list that ran 6 months deep. Now Tiana Johnson was 27 years old, successful, respected, and absolutely, completely fine about being single. She was great at her job. That was the thing people always said. She had an instinct for pairing people, not based on what they said they wanted, but based on what she watched them reach for. She noticed things. The way a client's face changed when they talked about their last relationship. The question they asked twice, because the answer mattered more than they admitted. The silence before they said the thing they'd been working up to for an hour. She was excellent at reading other people. She was significantly less excellent at applying any of that insight to herself. Her phone buzzed against the counter. Her business partner and closest friend, Riane, calling before 7. Which meant either catastrophe or gossip, and Riane had learned to lead with which one it was. "Good morning," Riane said. "Don't panic. That's a terrible way to start a sentence. We got an inquiry last night, a significant one." Riane's voice carried the particular tone she used when she was trying to sound professional and not succeeding. "Tiana, someone from the Kangdi organization reached out." Tiana set down her coffee mug. As in the Kangdi, yes." There was a pause in which Tiana considered several possible responses and discarded all of them. Kangdi was not a name you said casually in New Orleans, not in certain circles. His family had come to the city when he was 17. Part of a wave of Korean business interests that had established themselves quietly along the Gulf Coast over the last decade. Legitimate enterprises on the surface, shipping and hospitality and commercial real estate, and underneath those, the kind of arrangements that made the police look the other way and powerful men take his calls on the first ring. He had built the New Orleans operation from inherited chaos into something precise and almost elegant. He was known for being cold, for being direct to the point of cruelty in negotiations, for the fact that in 12 years of operating in a city that ran on relationship and social performance, not one photograph of him laughing had ever been published anywhere. "They want to meet," Riane continued, "tomorrow at his home." "Riane, the fee they're offering, Tiana." "How much?" Riane told her. Tiana picked up her coffee mug again, put it down, picked it up. "That's not a matchmaking fee," she said finally. "That's a number someone offers when they want a result, not a process." "Or," Riane said, "it's what someone pays when they can afford not to waste time." Tiana twisted the silver bracelet on her wrist, her grandmother's, worn on the left, always, and thought about it for exactly 45 seconds. "Set the meeting," she said. The Kangdi estate sat at the end of a private drive in the Garden District, behind iron gates that were newer than the house and significantly less decorative. The house itself was antebellum architecture that had been renovated into something that managed to feel simultaneously historical and cold. All the original molding and mahogany, none of the warmth those things usually implied. Tiana sat in the car for a moment before getting out, not because she was nervous. She had walked into the homes of professional athletes and oil heirs and a sitting state senator who had hired her to find his third wife, and believed this fact made him charming. She was not impressed by houses. She got out, straightened her blazer, checked the silver bracelet out of reflex. The staff member who met her at the door was a Korean man in his late 40s named Mr. O, who introduced himself with a formality that suggested the word introduction might be too casual for what he was actually doing. He led her through a house that was clean in the way of spaces that are managed rather than lived in, beautiful, empty, every surface suggesting the presence of someone who did not permit disorder. They stopped outside a set of double doors. "Mr. Kangdi will see you now," Mr. O said, and then opened the door and left her to walk through it alone, which Tiana noted as either a test or an oversight and suspected it was the former. The office was large, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves that appeared to have actually been read. A desk positioned so that whoever sat behind it had a full view of the room's only entrance. And behind the desk, not looking up from the document he was reading with the focused attention of a man who had decided he was not going to give her the satisfaction of watching her enter the room, Kangdi. He was not what she'd expected, which was annoying because Tiana had a very good track record on expectations. She'd expected older. She'd expected more obvious. She'd expected the kind of man who wore his power like a statement piece, the gold watch and the studied posture, and the hand extended just slightly too long in a handshake because he wanted you to feel it. He was none of those things. He was 30 and looked it, and the stillness about him wasn't performed. It was just the way he occupied space, like someone who had decided a long time ago that motion was a form of commentary, and he had nothing to say. He looked up from the document, looked at her, said nothing. Tiana waited a full 3 seconds and then said, "I charge extra if I have to introduce myself." Something moved in his expression, not a smile, adjacent to a reaction. "Tiana Johnson," he said. His voice was lower than she'd expected, and unhurried in a way that suggested he'd never once rushed a sentence in his life. Owner of the Johnson Matchmaking Agency, founded 4 years ago. Current waiting list, approximately 6 months. Client retention rate, 78%. 81 as of last month. He held her gaze for a beat. "Sit down," he said. "Thank you," she said, and sat, and made absolutely certain her posture matched his. The conversation that followed was the least romantic discussion of romance Tiana had ever participated in. Kangdi spoke about the need for a wife with the same tone and vocabulary he would have used to discuss a property acquisition. He needed someone compatible with his life. He was prepared to compensate generously for a thorough process. He expected a shortlist within 3 weeks and a final selection within 3 months. "And your personal preferences?" Tiana asked. Pen moving across her notepad. "Not logistically, personally." He tapped one finger against the desk just once. "I'll know her when I meet her." Tiana looked up from the notepad. "That's not a preference," she said. "That's a feeling." "Feelings are harder to work with but not impossible. I'll need more than that." "You'll have what I give you," he said, "and it will be enough." Tiana raised one eyebrow, one very deliberately. "Mr. Kangdi," she said. "I've matched a man who told me his only requirement was someone interesting, and a woman who said she just wanted someone not annoying. I work with vague. But I'm going to need you to at least pretend you understand the difference between what you want and what you'll tolerate." A long pause. "They're not the same thing," he agreed, as if she'd made a point worth acknowledging. "No," she said. "They never are." She left 2 hours later with a signed contract, a headache that felt more like a warning and the beginning of something she couldn't name yet. She named it later as irritation. That was the safest option. The first candidate was Seo-yeon Park, 31, a former runway model turned creative director for a fashion house with offices in Seoul and New York. She arrived at the first meeting in a dress that cost more than Tiana's first car and carried herself with the easy confidence of someone who had never once walked into a room and wondered whether she belonged there. She was stunning. She was impressive. She was, by every measurable standard, exactly the kind of woman a man in Kangdi's position should want. The dinner lasted 40 minutes. Afterward, Kangdi found Tiana in the hallway with the expression of a man who had eaten something politely and felt nothing. "Well," Tiana asked. "She spoke," he said. "For 19 minutes about the importance of visual identity in post-pandemic luxury markets. That's a valid interest. She didn't ask me a single question." Tiana made a note. Not in her professional notebook, the mental one she kept on every client, the observations that never made it to paper but informed everything. "Next week," she said, "I have someone who will definitely ask you questions." The second candidate, Nare Choi, asked him so many questions during dinner that Kangdi excused himself at the 40-minute mark, with a pleasantness that was more unsettling than anger would have been. He found Tiana in the hallway again. "She's interviewing me for a position I haven't applied for," he said. "She's thorough. She's compiling intelligence." Tiana pressed her lips together to keep the laugh from escaping. It escaped anyway, a small sound, quickly suppressed. Kangdi looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. "The third one," she said, recovering her professionalism, "is different. She's quieter." "I don't need quiet," he said. "I have plenty of quiet." Tiana looked at him. "Then what do you need?" He held her gaze for 1 second too long. "Someone who argues back," he said finally, then walked away down the corridor before she could respond. She stood there for a moment, twisting her bracelet, thinking several things in sequence that she was not prepared to think about. The third candidate was Ji-young Han, a corporate lawyer with an opinion on everything and the vocabulary to back it up. She was brilliant. She was funny, in the dry way that required attention to catch. She was exactly the kind of woman who argued back. Kangdi sat through dinner with the same stillness he brought to everything. He answered her questions. He held his own in a debate about maritime trade law that had somehow emerged from a conversation about wine. He called Tiana the next morning. "Ji-young Han," he said. "She's excellent, isn't she?" "She wants what I represent," he said. "Not what I am." A pause. "You can't always tell that from one dinner," Tiana said. "You can," he said, "if you're paying attention." She wanted to argue. She looked at her notes from the evening, the observation she'd made around the 90-minute mark, when Ji-young had started steering the conversation toward his business holdings with just enough subtlety to suggest she'd prepared for it. The moment Tiana had almost written down and then told herself she was being too critical. "I'll find someone else," Tiana said. "I know you will," he said, and hung up. She stared at her phone for a long moment. Then she wrote the observation in her notepad, finally, because it mattered, and because she was realizing, incrementally and without wanting to, that Kangdi was the most perceptive client she had ever worked with, and that being around that level of attention was doing something to her professional objectivity that she needed to address immediately. She made a note about that, too. The fourth candidate was a socialite named Diana Chung, who was charming and effortless, and whose warmth filled every room she entered like good lighting. Kangdi liked her more than the others. He had 3 dinners with her over 2 weeks, which was progress, and Tiana watched from her professional position with something that was absolutely not jealousy and was definitely just concern that she was misreading his requirements. The 4th dinner, Diana arrived 20 minutes late. She apologized beautifully. She had a beautiful reason. Kangdi accepted it with gracious and total silence, and afterward in the hallway that had become their unofficial debrief location, he straightened his cufflink and said, "She told me the same story she told me at the 2nd dinner. She doesn't remember what she's already said. People forget things. I don't forget things," he said, "and I find it difficult to be with people who do." Tiana looked at him. "That's an impossibly high standard." "I know," he said, without apology. She thought, briefly and unwillingly, that he had remembered everything she'd said across every meeting they'd had. Every correction, every observation, every argument. He'd referenced them, built on them, occasionally disagreed with them in ways that required him to have held them in exact detail. She pushed the thought away. "I'll arrange the next candidate," she said. "Tiana," she stopped. "The work you're doing," he said, and the pause before the next word was very brief, but she felt it, "is thorough." "That's my job." "Yes," he said. "I know." She left. She did not twist her bracelet in the car. She held her hands very still instead, which was different. The 5th candidate was Min-jae-oh, a philanthropist with a foundation that did genuine work in 3 countries. She was kind in the specific way that wasn't performance, the way that came from having seen something real and being changed by it. She was the best candidate yet. The dinner was extraordinary. Tiana had sat in on the first 20 minutes per her process and left, giving them privacy, and when she returned 2 hours later, she found them still talking. She felt something shift in her chest. She identified it correctly and immediately as hope for her client, because that was her job, and she went back to her car and sat there for an uncomfortable amount of time. Kangdi called the next morning. "Min-jae-oh is exceptional," he said. Tiana exhaled. "I think so too. Should I?" "She told me very honestly that she isn't looking for love," he said. "She's looking for a partnership that gives her the stability to expand the foundation's work. She wants a transaction with benefits, and she appreciates that my position would serve that." A long pause. "She said that?" Tiana asked. "She said it kindly, with complete integrity, which I respected. But I don't want someone who is honest about not wanting me," he said, and the simplicity of the sentence landed in Tiana's chest like something physical. "I want someone who can't help wanting me, even when it doesn't make sense." Silence. "That's very human of you," Tiana said finally, because she didn't know what else to say. "I have my moments," he said. That evening, alone in her office after Riane had gone home. Tiana sat at her desk and looked at the wall where she kept a whiteboard with her current clients' profiles, and she thought about that sentence for far longer than was professionally appropriate, even when it doesn't make sense. She twisted her bracelet until the clasp spun around to face her palm. 6 weeks into the engagement, Kangdi started appearing in places she hadn't arranged. The first time, she arrived at the mansion for a pre-meeting briefing and found him already in the dining room, a plate of food on the table that his chef had made for her specifically. She'd mentioned offhandedly once that she hadn't eaten. And she'd said it in passing in a corridor and hadn't thought he'd heard. He was reading at the table. He didn't look up. "The chef made galbai jjim," he said. "I remembered you said you hadn't tried it." "I didn't," she paused. "I didn't say that to you specifically. You said it to Mr. O in the hallway, on Tuesday." She sat down. The galbai jjim was excellent. The second time, she was working late in the small office they'd given her in the East Wing, going through candidate profiles, and she heard the door and looked up to find Kangdi in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee, his chef's coffee, not the terrible brand her office supplied. "It's 11:30, she said. "I was awake," he said. "Were you walking past my office at 11:30 carrying 2 cups of coffee accidentally?" He set 1 cup on her desk, sat in the chair across from her without being invited. "No," he said. She looked at him for a moment. "What are we doing?" She asked. "I'm drinking coffee," he said. "You're working." "Kangdi. Tiana." The way he said her name was different from the way clients usually said her name. It was the way you say the name of something you've been thinking about. She picked up the coffee, didn't say anything else. He stayed for an hour, reading, while she worked, and when she finally stood to leave, he walked her to the car and stood in the driveway until she drove out of sight. When she got home, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number that she recognized by the style of it immediately. "Text me when you get home." She stared at the message for a long time. Then she typed "I'm home" and turned the screen face down on the nightstand. She lay awake for an hour. She told herself, a professional. She had a process. She had candidates 5, 6, and 7 still to present. She had a contract. She had a reputation she had built from nothing with her own hands, and she was not going to jeopardize it because a client had started drinking coffee in her office at 11:30 and knew how to make a woman feel like the only person in a room. She was absolutely fine. She was not fine. 2 days later, she found the photograph. She had been looking for a folder Mr. O had left on the bookshelf in Kangdi's office. The candidate summaries for the last review, and the folder was between 2 books on the upper shelf. And when she shifted the books, a framed photograph came with them, and she caught it before it fell and stood there, holding it, looking at it without meaning to. A girl, maybe 14 or 15, Korean, dark hair, wearing a school uniform that was 2 sizes too big, probably because she'd grown into it too fast. She was looking at the camera sideways, not quite smiling, with the specific expression of someone who had been asked to smile and was compromising. She had Kangdi's eyes. Tiana was still looking at the photograph when Kangdi walked in. The shift in the room was immediate and total. He went still in the doorway, not the usual stillness, but the stillness of someone who has seen something they did not expect and has not yet decided what to do. Tiana turned. "I'm sorry," she said. "It almost fell. I wasn't, set it back, he said. His voice was different. Flat in a way it had never been with her. She set the photograph carefully back on the shelf and stepped away from the bookshelf and said, "Is that your sister?" "This meeting is about the sixth candidate," he said. "Kangdi, the sixth candidate." He said again, with a finality that closed every other door in the room. She didn't push. She had pushed on other things and he had respected it. This was different. This was the wall behind all the other walls, and she was a professional. And she sat down and opened the folder and talked about the sixth candidate. But she didn't forget the photograph. The girl's sideways almost smile. The too big uniform. And she noticed, for the first time, that the only personal item in the entire office was that one frame. She asked Riane to look into it, carefully, the way you look into things when you're not sure you should be looking. Riane, who had known Tiana since college and understood her methods, came back the next day with a look on her face that Tiana didn't like. "She passed 3 years ago," Riane said quietly. "Illness. Her name was Kangmai. She was 21. Tiana sat with that for a moment. She was younger than him by 9 years. "Yes. Did you find anything else?" Riane hesitated. "There was a story that circulated in the Korean community here, a few years back after she died. Something she'd told people, apparently her friends, some family members, about a woman who helped her once, when she was a teenager. She'd gotten separated from her school group in the French Quarter, and someone had helped her find her way back. Talked her through a panic attack. She talked about it for years." Tiana felt something cold move through her. What did the woman look like? Nobody remembered exactly. A black woman, young, warm, with a silver bracelet. The room was very quiet. Tiana looked down at her left wrist. "Riane," she said. Her voice came out even. She was proud of that. "I know," Riane said. I don't know if it was me. That was years ago. I talked to a lot of people." "I know," Riane said again. "This doesn't change anything about the assignment," Tiana said. "I have 2 more candidates to present. I have a contract. Nothing about this changes my professional responsibility." "Of course not," Riane said, and looked at her with the expression she used when she thought Tiana was lying to herself, which was almost entirely accurate. The sixth candidate was a celebrity chef named Harin, who had built a restaurant empire by 30 and who was funny and ambitious and had an energy that made rooms feel warmer. She and Kangdi had a good first meeting, a good second, the night of their third dinner. A Mardi Gras celebration was rolling past the restaurant's courtyard, music and noise, and the particular scented chaos of the season. And Harin had laughed at something through the window and leaned forward to see better. Kangdi had watched her and said nothing. Tiana was at the corner table with her notes when she looked up and caught the expression on his face. He was watching Harin like a man looking for something he knew he wouldn't find. A stray dog had wandered in from the courtyard. One of the servers moved to chase it out. Tiana, without thinking, slipped a piece of bread off her plate and set it near her chair for the dog, which accepted this calmly. When she looked up, Kangdi was watching her instead. Not Harin, her. She looked away, made a note about Ha-Rin she didn't finish. He called her the next morning. "Ha-Rin is extraordinary," he said. "She is. She deserves someone who is looking at her," he said. A pause. "Were you not?" Tiana asked. He didn't answer that. "One more candidate," he said. "Yes." "Tiana." Another pause longer. "You know it doesn't matter." She made herself misunderstand him. "The process always matters." "That's not what I'll send you the 7th candidate's profile tonight," she said, and ended the call and sat at her desk for a full minute before she could make herself move. That night, she found the other offer. It had come in 3 weeks ago from a matchmaking firm in Houston looking for a partnership. Her brand, their infrastructure, a significant equity stake. She'd read it and set it aside because she was mid-assignment. And it had sat in her bag in the zippered pocket she used for things she wasn't sure about. She took it out, read it again. Houston, new office, new clients, everything professional and forward-moving and far away from a man with the darkest eyes she'd ever looked directly into, who had started leaving her coffee and texting her late at night and making her feel for the first time in 3 years, like she might actually be worth staying for. She was terrified of exactly that. She put the offer back in her bag. The 7th candidate, Park So-young, a tech entrepreneur with a company valued in the hundreds of millions, arrived at the pre-meeting with an energy that suggested she was used to being the most capable person in any room and was comfortable with this. She was confident without performance, which was rare. She was, if Tiana was being completely honest, the best candidate she had found. The dinner lasted 3 hours. Tiana waited in the car this time. She didn't want to be in the room. Kangdi found her there. She startled when the passenger door opened and he got in and sat, jacket off, and said nothing for a moment. "How was it?" she asked. "She's remarkable," he said. "I know. You knew before you sent her. That's my job." He turned to look at her. She kept her eyes straight forward. "Tell me something," he said, "honestly." "I'm always honest with clients. Not as my matchmaker, as the person who's been having coffee with me at midnight for 3 weeks." A pause. "What do you think I should do?" Tiana's hands were in her lap. She wasn't twisting the bracelet. She was holding it, 2 fingers wrapped around the silver, anchoring herself. "I think," she said slowly, "that you should ask yourself the question you asked me, the one about choosing women you'd respect versus women you'd love." He was quiet. "And," he said, "and I think," she said, "that you already know the answer, which is why you're sitting in my car instead of finishing dinner." Another silence, longer. "There's a different question I'd rather ask," he said. "Don't," she said. Not sharply, not coldly, just quietly with everything she meant packed into one word. He looked at her for a long moment. She felt it without turning. "Text me when you get home," he said, and got out of the car. She drove home. She sat in her driveway for 11 minutes. She texted "I'm home" and put her phone down and thought about the Houston offer with more seriousness than she had before. What happened next came from a direction she hadn't watched. The 7th candidate, Park So-young, was not merely remarkable. She was also, as it turned out, extraordinarily determined, and the source of that determination was not romantic feeling for Kangdi, but something considerably colder. Her family had a long-standing relationship with Kangdi's uncle, a man named Kang Cheol-soo, who had sat at the edge of every Kangdi meeting Tiana had attended with the stillness of a man who had learned patience as a form of weaponry. He was 62. He had run the family organization during the years between Kangdi's father's death and Kangdi's ascension, and he had never entirely released what that felt like. So-young knew this. She had been brought into the process not despite Kangdi's uncle, but because of him. Because Kang Cheol-soo needed Kangdi married into the right family, one that would give the uncle leverage, access, and eventually a hand in operational decisions that Kangdi currently held entirely alone. When So-young realized that Kangdi was not going to choose her, not because of a disqualifying flaw, but because he was in the process of falling in love with someone else, someone who was not even supposed to be a candidate, a Black American matchmaker from Magazine Street, she was not heartbroken. She was furious, not because she loved him, but because she had invested 6 months in a plan that was failing because of an inconvenient human emotion, and nobody in her experience had ever beaten her because of an inconvenient human emotion. She went to the uncle. He was unsurprised. He had been watching Kangdi watching Tiana for 6 weeks. "This is fixable," he said. "I agree," said So-young. The fixable part involved a series of financial records that showed payments from a third-party account to Tiana's agency that, read selectively and out of context, suggested she had been targeting Kangdi as a mark from the beginning, identifying him as a potential client, manufacturing the referral, and engineering the selection process to position herself as the outcome. Photos of Tiana in meetings with men who were connected, at 6 degrees of separation, to a rival organization. Messages, constructed carefully from fragments of real correspondence, that read as strategic manipulation. It was sophisticated work. The uncle had resources. So-young had the specific knowledge of a woman who had been inside the selection process and knew which details would be most damaging. It took them 9 days. Kangdi called Tiana into a meeting she hadn't requested. She knew something was wrong before she walked in. Mr. O wouldn't meet her eyes. The house felt different, the specific stillness of spaces where a decision has already been made and nobody has announced it yet. Kangdi was standing when she entered, not sitting, which was unlike him. His cufflink was already straightened. She noticed that detail and understood it immediately. He set a file on the desk in front of her. She looked at it, opened it. Read the first page. The second page. She felt the room get very quiet in a very particular way. The quiet of someone understanding what's being said about them and not having words for it immediately because the words would require engaging with. Something that isn't real. These aren't real, she said. I know that's Kangdi. She looked up from the file. I'm telling you these aren't real. Look at me. He looked at her, and she saw it, the thing she feared she'd see, not accusation. He hadn't decided, but he was looking at the file and looking at her, and something in him was hesitating between the two. That was what destroyed her, not an accusation, a hesitation. After everything, after 6 weeks of midnight coffee and text messages, and a car conversation in which she had talked herself back from the edge of something terrifying because she had trusted him, a hesitation. She closed the file. I see. She said, Tiana, no, quietly, completely steady. I understand that you have responsibilities. I understand that this information was presented to you and that it looks serious. I'm telling you it isn't real. And I'm telling you that you already know that, somewhere, or you wouldn't be standing up right now. He said nothing. I'm resigning the contract, she said. You'll receive the formal letter tomorrow. I'll recommend someone who can continue the selection process. Don't do this. You hesitated, she said, simply, not accusatory, just true. He opened his mouth. She left. In her car, 3 blocks from the estate. She pulled over and sat for exactly 4 minutes. She did not cry. She started cleaning, or the car equivalent of cleaning, which was reorganizing the items in her center console with a focused attention that suggested she was doing something else entirely. Then she called Renee. I'm done with the Kangdi assignment, she said. Tiana, I need you to look at the Houston offer again, the partnership. I think I'm going to take it. A pause. When do you want to go? Soon, she said. I'll explain later. She reached into the zippered pocket of her bag, took out the Houston offer, looked at it. She wrote the resignation letter that night. It was professional and formal and gave 30 days' notice and recommended 2 other agencies that could continue the bride search. The last line, the one she wrote and rewrote 3 times and ultimately kept, said, I hope whoever you choose makes you laugh. You deserve to laugh. She sealed the envelope. She was going to take it by the estate in the morning. She went to bed. She did not sleep. She was up at 6:47, her default hour, her body's own stubborn clock, when Renee called. I need you to see something, Renee said. Can you come in? I was going to, Tiana, come in now, please. Renee had been doing what Renee did when something felt wrong, which was look deeper and follow the thread until she understood what she was holding. She had been looking at the fabricated documents for 12 hours. The financial records were sophisticated, but Renee was a former forensic accountant who had switched careers after deciding the money was not worth the misery. And she knew what real paper trails looked like versus what someone who understood paper trails but had manufactured them quickly produced. These are fabricated, Renee said. I can show you exactly where. I know they're fabricated, Tiana said. The photographs are composite, Renee said. Good composite work, but composite. The metadata is wrong by 3 days, and I don't think whoever put this together realized that mattered. Can you document that? Already am. Renee looked at her. Do you want me to send this to him? Tiana sat with the question for a moment that felt longer than it was. No, she said. Send it to his head of security. His name is Kim Soo-hyun. Kangdi trusts him. He'll look at it. And then I'm going to go finalize the Houston arrangements, she said. Because I already resigned, and it's the right decision, and none of this changes that. Renee looked at her with the expression she reserved for times when Tiana was being stubborn about something painful. The evidence doesn't clear you with him, Riane said carefully. It just proves the documents were fake. It doesn't explain why someone fabricated them. You'd need to be there to— I know, Tiana said. Tiana, I know, she said again, and picked up the Houston offer. What she didn't know, what happened in the 22 hours after she sent the forensic analysis to Kim Soo-hyun, and before Kangdi appeared at her office door, was this. Kangdi had spent the night unable to sleep, which was his pattern when something was wrong, sitting at the desk in his office with the forensic analysis on one side and Tiana's resignation letter on the other, and the photograph of Kang Mai in between. And was looking at the last line of the letter, "I hope whoever you choose makes you laugh," when Kim Soo-hyun knocked. Kim Soo-hyun sat down across from him. "The documents are fabricated," Kim said. "Composite photographs, forged transfer records." "I know who put this together." Kangdi said nothing. "Park So-young," Kim continued. "Working with your uncle." A pause. "My uncle." "There's more," Kim said, and he set down a second file. The second file had taken Kim Soo-hyun 3 months to compile, because he had been looking, quietly, without telling Kangdi, because he wasn't certain until he was at an inconsistency in the account of the night Kangdi's father died. 8 years ago, a rival attack, the official story ran, a targeted hit by a competing organization, except the rival organization had denied it, quietly and persistently through back channels. At the time, Kangdi had been told this was deflection. Now Kim Soo-hyun had found the source of the original intelligence that had named the rival organization as responsible. The source was the uncle. It had always been the uncle. Kang Cheol-soo had spent 30 years watching his older brother run the organization. He had spent the 8 years after the brother's death watching his nephew run it instead. He had spent 3 months watching his nephew fall in love with a matchmaker and deciding that the upcoming selection event, the ballroom, the 7 brides, the public finality of it, was his last window to install the right family alliance and take back what he believed was his. The marriage scheme had been the last move. What it revealed when it unraveled was the one before it. Kangdi read the file twice. He sat very still for a long time. Then he got up, straightened his cufflink, both of them methodically, and said, "Handle the uncle. I have somewhere to be." She didn't answer the first call. She was in the middle of a meeting with the Houston firm, video call, professional, everything moving toward something clean and forward, when his name appeared on her phone, and she declined it with the practiced ease of a woman who had made a decision and was not going to revisit it. She didn't answer the second call either. The third was a text. "We need to talk." She typed, "I know. I'll send a final accounting of the contract by end of week." 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times. Then, "That's not what I mean. I know what was done to you. I know who did it. I'm outside your building." She looked at the text for a moment. Then she looked at her laptop, at the Houston contract on the screen. Then she got up. He was in the lobby. He had not gone to the front desk or asked for her or made his presence known to anyone. He was simply standing near the window with his hands in his pockets like a man who had decided to wait and was prepared to wait indefinitely. She came down the stairs. He turned when he heard her. And something crossed his face that she had never seen on him before, not the stillness, not the calculation, something much more unguarded than either. "I know," he said. "Before you say anything, I know. The evidence was fabricated. I know who did it and why. Kim Soo-hyun has the documentation. My uncle has been removed from the organization." Tiana crossed her arms. "You hesitated," she said. "Yes. With me after everything." "Yes." No deflection, no softening, just the word. "I need you to understand what that felt like," she said. "For someone like me, who was told before by someone she loved that she wasn't worth staying for, and then chose to trust again, and then watched you pick up that file and—" She stopped. Her voice was completely steady. She had a lot of practice with this. "I need you to understand that I'm not angry at you. I'm telling you the truth." He was watching her with the focused attention she'd noticed on the first day. "The kind that made you feel located." "I know," he said. "I'm sorry." A pause. Then he said, "There's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you at the beginning. I didn't tell you because of a rare hesitation." "Because I wasn't certain how to," she waited. "My sister," he said. "Kang Mai." She went very still. "She got separated from her school group in the French Quarter when she was 15, he said. She had a hard time at school, at home. She was the kind of person who felt things very deeply, and the world wasn't particularly gentle with her about that." His voice was even. But she could hear what was underneath it, the way people speak about grief that has had time to settle into shape. A woman found her, talked her through it, helped her find her way back. She talked about that encounter for years. She said the woman wore a silver bracelet and made her feel like everything was going to be okay. Tiana's hand went to her bracelet without her telling it to. "She was 21 when she died," he said. "Afterward. I went through everything she kept, her journals, the things she'd said to people about her life, about the moments that mattered. There was a description of the woman from the French Quarter, the city she thought she was from. The agency she'd mentioned." He paused. "I hired a private investigator 3 months before I called your agency." Tiana felt something in her chest give way very slowly. "You knew who I was," she said. "I knew who she described," he said. "I couldn't be certain until I met you, but I knew within the first hour." He looked at her directly. "You didn't recognize me at all. She was 15. We never crossed paths. But she told me about you so many times that I felt like I'd already met you long before you walked into that office." Tiana sat down on the nearest chair, not because her legs were failing her, but because she needed a moment to be still. "Why didn't you tell me?" she said. "Because I didn't want you to feel watched," he said, "or obligated, or like whatever happened between us was because of her." He stopped. "Then, I wanted you to choose it, independently. Not because of a debt or a connection you didn't know you had." She looked at her bracelet. "All this time," she said. "All this time," he agreed. She was quiet for a long moment. She thought about a 15-year-old girl in a school uniform 2 sizes too big, shaking in the French Quarter, and the woman she had been at 23, recently heartbroken, new to the city. Sharp with self-protection and soft with other people's pain. She thought about the things you do without knowing they matter. "She sounds like she was extraordinary," Tiana said. Kangdi said nothing for a moment, just looked at her. "She was." They didn't resolve anything that afternoon. Not completely. That was a thing about real life, about real damage. It didn't clean up neatly in one conversation. But Tiana pulled the Houston acceptance from her bag. She had signed it that morning before the calls and looked at it and looked at him and did not send it. Instead, she said, "I need time." "Take it," he said. "I'm not promising anything." "I know, and I still resign the contract. That's done. I'm not asking you to unmatch me," he said. "I'm asking you to not disappear." She looked at him for a long time. "The ballroom event," she said. "You already had it scheduled." "Yes." "You're still going to have it. 7 brides, selection ceremony, the whole thing." He held her gaze. "I have one thing I still need to do," he said. "At the ballroom, and then you'll understand everything." She twisted the bracelet. "Text me when you leave," she said. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile. Close. "Yes," he said. She almost didn't go. The night of the selection event, she stood in her apartment in the navy dress, the professional one. Not ceremonial, and told herself she was going because she had a professional obligation to oversee the final stage of the process, which was technically true and also completely beside the point. She went because she couldn't not go. She took the elevator down. She got in the car. She sat outside the Hotel Maison Royale for 3 minutes, hands on the wheel, watching other guests in their formal wear flowing through the entrance. Then she went inside. She had positioned herself near the back by the pillar. She always found the edges of rooms at events like this, the vantage points from which you could see everything without being seen, and she watched the 7 women in white arrange themselves. Near the stage, and she watched the guests settle, and she watched the room hold its breath when Kangdi rose from his chair. She watched him walk toward the stage. She watched him walk past it. When he started walking toward the back wall, toward her, she didn't move. She thought very clearly, in the 2 seconds it took him to cross the room. I know what he's doing. And the part of her that had spent 3 years building walls around the specific knowledge, that she was not someone people stayed for, felt those walls begin, in a deeply inconvenient way, to give. He stopped in front of her. The room had been silent for what felt like a long time, but had probably been 7 seconds. She looked at the ring. She looked at him. "You hired me," she said, "to find your bride." The faint smile appeared. The one she had seen maybe 4 times across 3 months. The one that changed his face into something human and devastating. "I hired you," he said, "because I already knew who she was." She said yes. Not immediately. There was a moment between the yes and the question in which she stood in a ballroom full of 200 people who were completely silent. With a diamond ring in front of her, and 3 months of her life suddenly reordered into a story she hadn't known she was in. And she thought about the Houston offer in her bag, and the resignation letter with its last line, and the text messages at midnight, and a girl with a silver bracelet she didn't know she'd remembered saving. She thought about her grandmother's bracelet on her wrist. She thought about what it felt like to finally be chosen. She said yes. The room did not stay silent after that. 200 people who had arrived expecting one story received a different and considerably better one, and they expressed this with the volume appropriate to the occasion. Somewhere in the crowd, one of the 7 women in white started clapping, because she was a genuinely good sport, and the story was undeniably more interesting this way. 2 advisors looked at each other with the expression of men reassessing everything they thought they knew about their employer. Mr. O, standing near the left wall, had the expression of a man who had known for at least 6 weeks and had been waiting with significant patience. Later, when the room had shifted from stunned to celebratory, when champagne had appeared from somewhere, and the 7 women had been quietly, respectfully thanked and given the courtesy of a graceful exit, Tiana and Kangdi stood near the windows where the city lights of New Orleans spread gold and green below them. She turned the ring in her fingers. It was not ostentatious. It was exact and clear and sat on her hand like it had been made for it. "Out of 7 brides," she said, because she needed to say it, because she had built a career on asking the questions people avoided. "Why me?" He looked at her with the direct, unhurried attention she had spent 3 months learning to receive without flinching. "Because you were never one of the 7, he said. She thought about it, about how different that was from what she'd feared every day across 3 months. Which was that she would do the work and find the perfect woman and watch him choose her and go back to Magazine Street and be fine about it. She had been so certain that was the story she was in. She had been wrong about the story. "You really knew," she said. "From the first day, from the first hour," he said, "when you told me what I'd paid for in a client briefing like it was a legal deposition. You were impossible to work with. You were the only person who told me that." "Surely not everyone else implies it," he said. "You just say it." She laughed, a real one, not managed. He watched it happen with the expression of a man storing something. "Kang Mai would have liked you," he said quietly. She had the same thing. She said exactly what she thought, even when it made things difficult. Tiana reached out and touched his arm, not dramatically, just her hand on his sleeve. Brief, grounding. "Tell me about her sometime," she said. He looked at the city below them for a moment. Then, "I will." In the weeks that followed, Kangdi did what people who have just had the floor of their reality pulled out from under them sometimes do. He rebuilt it deliberately. His uncle's removal was not a clean or simple thing. There were legal proceedings, organizational restructuring, the careful dismantling of arrangements that had been in place for years. There were moments in which the people around Kangdi expected to see the coldest version of him, the one that ran on calculation and none of the other things. Instead, they saw something different. Not softness, exactly. Kangdi was not a man who became soft. But where the organization had run on fear before, it began to run on something more specific, accountability. With a precision that his father's empire had lacked and his uncle's ambitions had never cared about. He began separating the parts of what he'd inherited, that could be rebuilt into something he wasn't ashamed of from the parts that needed to end. It was slower work. It was harder. It was, in the opinion of the people closest to him, the first real thing they'd seen him do. Tiana called the Houston firm and declined. Renee called her 7 minutes later, unsurprised. "I know," Tiana said. "Good," Renee said. "Don't say I told you so." "I would never," Renee said, in a tone that made clear she was absolutely going to someday. "So what now?" "I think," Tiana said, looking at the ring on her hand, and then at the street outside her window, and then at the city she'd built a career in one card table desk at a time. "I'm going to keep the agency and figure out the rest. And him. He texts me every night." She said, "Until I text back." Renee was quiet for a moment, then she said, "That's actually really sweet for him." "Don't tell him that," Tiana said. "He'll be insufferable." She was smiling when she said it. She didn't try to stop. She asked him once, much later, what he'd felt the moment he'd seen her in his office for the first time, the woman from his sister's journals. Sitting across from him in a blazer and a professional coolness that barely concealed the sharpness underneath. He thought about it the way he thought about most things that mattered, without rushing. Turning it over until he had the words that were actually true rather than the words that sounded right. "Like something I thought I'd lost had been returned," he said, "and I didn't know how to accept it without losing it again." She thought about herself at 23, sitting beside a frightened teenager in the French Quarter, with the afternoon light coming gold off the buildings. Talking her back from a panic attack with the same instinct she brought to everything. The certainty that people could be okay if you just stayed with them until they remembered they could breathe. She hadn't known she was doing anything that would last. She hadn't known there was a younger brother who would hear the story for years and carry the woman in it like an unfinished sentence. She hadn't known that a contract she almost didn't take would become a life she hadn't imagined for herself. She thought about how many things happened without you knowing they mattered. She reached across and straightened his cufflink. Because it had shifted and he hadn't noticed, and watched the look that crossed his face when she did, the quiet, unguarded thing he only let her see. "Text me when you get home," she said, even though they were both home. He understood exactly what she meant. "Always," he said. "And that's where I'll leave them. A woman who spent years helping everyone else find what she didn't think she deserved. A man who spent years believing that loving someone was the same as losing them. And the truth that neither of them expected, that sometimes the story you're in is not the one you were hired for. What would you have done in Tiana's moment? When she had that resignation letter in hand, the Houston offer signed, and every reason to walk away, would you have gone to the ballroom? And for Kangdi, do you think there's a version of this where his hesitation was unforgivable? Or was it human enough to move past? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I genuinely read them all. If stories like this one are the kind you come back for, consider subscribing. There are more of these coming, each one written to hit differently. Thank you for being here for this one.